I'd like to ask each of the panelists how this, evolving world of big data is changing your industry. And I'll go ahead and ask a follow-up question for each person, and that is, what's motivating the change? Is it the availability of these new kind of data? Are there new things on the demand side? What kind of changes are you seeing? Dylan?
So I'm going to make a couple of broad statements on that topic. I'd say over the last 3 to 5 years, large companies have spent time putting in place their infrastructure to capture all the data that is at their disposal. This is everything from data capture systems from within their four walls to outside in the cloud. They've also been bringing in solutions to format their data properly and then put it into whatever their repository might be, whether it be Hadoop, NoSQL, etc. And I would say just recently, in the past year, they have really, with passion, focused in on analytics and focusing in on finding the insights that all of this data can actually yield. And so I believe that infrastructure continues to be built out for the big data ecosystem, and I'd say that more and more people, at least from our perspective, which is not necessarily an unbiased perspective, I'd say that more and more market participants are focusing on the applications that are providing the insights, whether it be analytics or visualization or any number of other applications.
Can I ask, do you think that that's really being driven more by opportunity or by fear?
That's a fantastic leading question. Almost, I tell you, it's almost as if we coordinated that. I expect we did not, but there's really two kinds of clients. I would say those that are proactively, genuinely looking for insights to improve their servicing of their clients, whether they're a product or a services company. I'd say that there are others that have read a number of Andy Grove's books and are very, very fearful, either fearful of losing their incumbent leading position or are aspiring to be the new leader in their particular segment and want to use predictive analytics and machine learning to accelerate their path or improve the probability of achieving their goal.
Okay, thanks. Neil, what would you say about the biggest changes you're seeing?
Yeah, so I'll focus my response on the security industry. So the security industry is going under a ton of change, probably more than it's ever seen in at least as long as I've been following this industry. And so Gartner has a pretty interesting quote in a recent report, basically projecting that by 2020, 60% of security investment budgets will be spent on rapid detection and response, up from less than 10% today. Today, 90% of it, security spend is on preventative technologies, which are mostly signature-based. So that represents tens of billions of dollars of money changing hands over the next 5 or 6 years, which obviously is a huge opportunity. The security industry overall is 30 to 40 million in product and an equal amount in services, so it's a 70 to 80 billion dollar market. So really where big data comes into play is as you move from signature-based preventative technologies to behavioral-based detective technologies, being able to get more data, store it for longer, analyze it harder, gives you the ability to make those behavioral detections more accurate with more true positives, less false positives than what's ever been possible in the past, where the behavioral approaches typically didn't work well enough to be used by many people. So that's sort of the promise of big data in security, and you're seeing these changes roll out at every sub-segment across the security industry, from application security to endpoint security to network security. Every bit of security is being impacted by big data and machine learning.
Okay. Can I ask a quick follow-up on that? When you say it's really rapid detection and response, so this brings in the buzzword real-time analysis. Anybody who's ever used MATLAB knows that that's not exactly real-time. How are things changing to allow this sort of more rapid processing of these huge data sets?
Well, first of all, there's a huge area for improvement. Most of the time, companies don't detect their own breaches. The outside world does and tells them about it months after the fact. So we're starting with months after the fact, someone telling you that you've been breached as the nearest real time that exists today. But what's going on is that there are a number of changes. You know, obviously, Hadoop is batch-based and not necessarily real-time, you know, depending on how you define it. Some of the newer technologies that sit on top of HDFS, like Spark, have a real-time path and can enable much faster processing on machine learning, as well as, you know, having the real-time path for certain types of use cases.
Okay. Panel, I hope you don't mind. I'd like to switch order from what I told you before. Knox, your area is close to security, but you've also done an awful lot with medicine. What kind of changes are you seeing in your sector?
Everything is different. I was at a sort of crash course in genomics. I'm a computer guy by training, but a biology professor was lamenting to me that the reason he went into biology was that he didn't like math, statistics, and computers. And it's all math, statistics, and computers now. So with respect to what's changing now, these things take a while to trickle down into clinical use, but because standards of care are understandably conservative. But people talk seriously now about if we understood this person's genome and how those genes were regulated, we would be able to prescribe a medicine that would be tailored for that specific person. And understanding how that person differs from everyone else is a very important problem to solve. You know, if you want to target a drug for a person, you need to know how his pathway deviates from everyone else's, and that really means having lots and lots of data from all sorts of different types of people. It drives fundamental changes in the way the pharmaceutical industry will work. Everything is different
Okay.
in healthcare.
To follow through on that, you mentioned that standards of care are very conservative. What's really pushing this? Is it more in the R&D sector that's pushing it? Is it really more in therapeutics or what?
Well, I have the privilege of being associated with a group of oncology clinics, fortunately not for my own health reasons, but because they're doing really interesting stuff in genomics. And I sit on a call every month or so where they talk about particularly interesting cases. They typically present a case to a molecular pathologist who says, well, it seems that this pathway is disrupted in this tumor. We don't currently have a drug that targets that particular defect, but we have one that targets a precursor defect, or a precursor to that precursor. And maybe if we target that, the tumor will shrink. And lo and behold, it does in a lot of cases. So you get the sense in listening to the doctors talk about the genomics that we're just on the cusp of understanding what's really happening with systems biology, and that's all driven by big data.
Okay.
So it's really being used in the clinic.
Okay, thanks. On the cusp of understanding. Yeah, Dylan, go ahead.
One additional change that I've observed just in my 1 year at Skytree. So I'd say a year ago, I found a lot more players in the big data segment that felt that they could really do it all in terms of the solution. And what I found changed, which is very, very positive, I think, is that people are tending to specialize and be the best at what they do and really better define their scope so they can focus and remain leaders, but also for clarity for the customers, and have become a lot more collaborative. And so what we're seeing is that leaders in other subsegments within big data are very collaborative, want to work on solution stacks and reference designs really to better and best serve our joint clients around the world, because the clients that everyone is trying to service they're going through a bit of confusion continuing. And it's great to actually have some SIs and consultants on the panel, because they provide an incredibly important service in honest strategy and honest guidance of what is real and what is claimed. And I'd say that I think the collaborative nature in our industry is just increasing, because everybody genuinely wants to service their clients, and things are becoming very real.
Do you think that's a function of the open source movement, or what kind of things is really causing that?
I'd say it's necessity, and mediocrity is not a sustainable business model. And in order to be the best, given the The bright people are in the industry, the economics at work, and the stakes involved for the end clients. If you're going to be the best, you got to focus. And there are too many things happening in every subsegment to be the best at everything. It's becoming increasingly more dynamic with everything from the changes and innovations to Hadoop to what's happening with the heterogeneity of the data sets, which is impacting the ETL space. The incredible innovations in visualization and analytics. It really is becoming a specialist game. And if one could be a leader in a specialty and be open and collaborative and helping others, I think it's a great place to be.
Yeah, one of the things that is behind all of what you're saying is the incredible pace of rapid technology development on the machine learning side, on the different kind of data management side and so forth. I'd like to move on. Jim, in advertising, how is all this playing out?
Well, yeah, actually, our parent company Dentsu does a lot with advertising, but more recently I've kind of been working more closely with the engineering groups, especially with some of our automotive clients and so on. And I always ask myself that same question about is it fear versus opportunity? And kind of I was thinking as Dylan was talking, really I almost feel like it's just they look at it as another application of Kaizen. It's like, how can we use big data to improve our manufacturing and our product development and our test data analysis better? Stay competitive, maintain position, lower costs. It's almost just like, just another thing to, this is the flavor of Kaizen now, is how do we use big data to improve our existing manufacturing. So that's, and not just manufacturing, but even like test data, and product development, in all parts of the organization. But then another side too, I kind of break off, there's also like using it for more decision-making processes. How can we, make decisions faster, better? It started out, I kind of see, when we're talking about some of the changes in big data, there are things, a lot of like or batch processed solutions, right? And now, then people will do it faster, and then they go, well, if we can do it faster, why can't we, have a real-time dashboard where we can tweak it? And it's like this acceleration of, it's like to the point of, wanting to predict the decisions is also kind of a trend that is starting to happen, to kind of just iterate and, analyze data in real time so you can make faster decisions. And we also see that kind of demand from some of our customers.
Okay. In regard to that kind of thing, it's been in movie after movie where the computer will tell you to do one thing and the real world answer is very different. Are we going to have situations in which people have a reaction against big data, do you think, Jim?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think when it starts crossing, when it becomes personal, I think, it might get, manufacturing is one thing, but, when you're crunching social data, or there's also one area that we've looked at a bit too, kind of separate from that, is more of like analyzing people's location data. You've got your Foursquare, all these different, Facebook. They all know where you've been, and once you kind of get into that more, where the effects are more personally seen, I think we'll get into more difficult territories.
And that also fits into this thing about if you're not the best, you really can't play, right? That was the point that was made earlier. Thanks. Kelly, what about clean tech and smart grid? How is that really changing with the advent of big data? What's motivating the change?
Yeah, well, I'm regulators. We're in a regulated industry, so anytime there's a CapEx or some deployment or a difference in pricing, it has to be approved by regulators. The main thing for us is smart meters. I think everyone here in California is familiar with smart meters. But effectively, we went from 1 meter read or 1 data point per month at any residential home or at a business to 2,880 with smart meters, and that's at a 15-minute interval read. With some of the directly connected devices or at the connected home, as Dylan mentioned, you can get as near real time as those devices allow. A lot of that is 1 second data. We're working with a number of utilities that want to use a number of these resources in something that's called ancillary services, which is basically kind of an insurance policy for utilities to smooth out demand across the grid, and there you have to have a 4-second latency or a 4-second loop. So communication needs to be sent to a device. The device needs to check in and say whether it's available, and then communicate back to the independent systems operator or the utility that it's available. So if you take all of those data points, for my house, for instance, it said 5 years ago that you had less sensors in your house than you had in your car. Now, if you live in a 2-story home and you have an electric vehicle and you have a couple of Nest thermostats and everything else that you have, we're able to determine movement in your home, occupancy in your home. All of those are increased data points. At the same time, I think you asked where some of the limitations are. Where people push back, it's basically when it gets too intrusive. So one of the things we do is called demand response, and that's effectively when there's an overall capacity issue on the electricity grid where effectively the utility is not generating enough capacity. So instead of building new power plants, they basically ask people at certain times to use less power. So something that we do is called direct load control, where we can directly control thermostats. So if someone's home and they're having, and by the way, this usually happens at the 8 to 10 hottest days of the year, and the way to directly control load is through thermostats. So when you start turning someone's temperature up in their home on a hot afternoon, the payback needs to be significant. There's a utility in California that they have a program where they will rebate you $25 a year if you allow them to control your thermostats on the 15 hottest days of the year. So kind of the return there isn't necessarily that appealing to a lot of people. So
Yeah.
we have to, yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of the use cases are important for us. Yeah, exactly. That's right. On the 15 days, we actually use air conditioning.
Kelly, at the very beginning, you said that the regulators are really kind of motivating this, right? And granted, this is one of the first time I've ever heard regulation as a positive impact on business development.
Well, yeah.
I want to ask, what's pushing the regulators?
So I think to understand that maybe energy efficiency and demand response is a cheaper form of electricity than coal or nuclear,
Yeah.
both from a capital perspective and from an environmental impact. I think a lot of times we call it Clean Tech 1.0, which was the movement about 5 to 7 years ago when you would see Solyndra getting billions of dollars of loans from the DOE, or some of the large alternative fuel companies coming on board, and smart meters were making a big impact then. And the way that they got their rate case built through the regulators was something called meter to cash. And the idea was, yeah, the meter's going to cost probably $500 per home, but we won't have to pay meter readers anymore to come out to the home and to find out what your usage was for the month. We can do that remotely. Now a lot of regulators have started to come in and say that alone does not justify the increased rates, so we need to find other ways to analyze that data, whether that's through demand response or through an offering like O-Power, where you can go to the PG&E website and they will tell you exactly what your consumption was yesterday, or they'll offer you a matrix that says if you had been on this separate plan, you would have saved this much power over the last year. Which I'm not an employee of O-Power, I'm obviously an employee of AutoGrid. But simply going to their site, a plan came up and said you would have saved $1,000 last year if you were on this. I mean, that's a lot more significant than $25 a year, and it's just by changing plans. That's just through data analytics.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yasushi, you're working with business simulations and with platforms for decision analysis, decision support. Yasushi, how's that business changing as a result of big data?
Yeah, we observed start of significant change in Japan. An epoch-making discussion happened in the National Diet of Japan yesterday. A use case of business simulation by Osaka Gas Company. Osaka Gas is the second largest gas utility company in Japan. The use case was decision making for new businesses in Osaka Gas. They use business simulation for decision making and to follow up the management of new businesses.
Now, this is not the decision that was announced this morning about not restarting the nuclear power plant, is it?
No.
Okay, just to be clear.
Actually, so the government sometimes doing very good things for us. Right? So not just so actually we are working with power companies, and then before that accident, we actually have simulation for what if nuclear power plant stops. Before the earthquake, or financial simulation. We did that. Yeah. So the discussion in the diet was how business simulation can help investment by large companies. Because of those investments by large companies, government thinks they can stimulate households to invest their money to stock market. Yeah, so we can see a significant start of significant changes.